So I think the first thing to say is just to respond to something that Denis Villeneuve said in that interview, that gorgeous interview, which I could honestly just go back and listen to again, if only for the sound of his voice, is that thing about, decided to cheat. It's not cheating. I know he was saying that, ironically, but the fact of the matter is that it's been demonstrated amply that you can't do Dune in a movie. You have, on the one hand, you have the Jodorowsky approach, which is that you prepare to make a movie that's going to last somewhere between 10 and 14 hours. And, despite Orson Welles and Mick Jagger and Salvador Dali, the movie doesn't get made. And one of the reasons it doesn't get made is because it's just not going to be possible to do that. On the other hand, there's the problem that David Lynch found himself in, which was that even with, a wrangled script that attempted to rein a lot of that book in, they ended up at the end having to cut back the movie to the point that it was incoherent. So either too short to make sense or too long to get made. And consequently, you're left with a position which is, yes, the sensible thing to do is to bisect it. The really interesting thing, and I'm saying this because we'll get to sort of reviewing the movie itself, but the really interesting thing about that is that question about, is part 2 guaranteed? And there is a genuine bravery going into this when that isn't guaranteed. Because obviously, in order for part 2 to happen, part 1 has to be well received. And there is a tantalizing possibility that, say, Dune isn't as well received as it should be. You end up with Dune part 1... ...
Le Fin.
And of course, there is that documentary, Jodorowsky's Dune, which imagines the film that Jodorowsky was going to make, and it's a fantastic documentary, and it is arguably a better documentary than Jodorowsky's film could ever have been had he managed to realise it. And I do think I thought the calmness with which he talked about that, the calmness with which he said, no, it's not definite, and I'm waiting for the audience to kind of complete the picture by asking for the second part. I thought that was really well done. And also, the last thing I'll say in this, I'm sort of delaying reviewing the film itself.
Is this like the pre-title sequence?
Yeah, is in America. The film is available on HBO and in cinemas. I think actually it was HBO just before the cinemas. Here it is in cinemas. You asked Denis Villeneuve about this is a cinematic experience. This is a film to be seen in cinemas. It is not a film to be seen at home. I understand, obviously, that because of everything that's going on, there may be reasons for home streaming in America. But this is a film that is absolutely designed to be seen in an auditorium with a cinema sound system almost being more important than the image itself.
Yes.
And it is a theatrical movie. However people end up seeing it, it is made for cinema.
Even more so, I mean, Bond is huge, but this is hugerer.
Yeah, and it's also, it has to be that immersive thing, because if, for example, when you're on Arrakis, if you're not surrounded by the planet, it's not going to have the impact that it was designed for. I mean, here's the verdict. It's very good. And it's kind of a relief that it is very good, because we've all waited for a very long time. Also because we've seen other filmmakers thwarted by attempting to get Dune on screen. And I think it's very good for a number of reasons. The first one is I think it has a pretty clear arc. This part 1 does Paul Atreides goes to Arrakis, discovers what may or may not be his dawning destiny. And that story has a clear through line, which makes sense for... You don't have to have read the book. You don't have to have any kind of prior knowledge. You can follow it. I think it does the colonial metaphor stuff very clearly without getting bogged down in it. The most important thing, however, is that the way the film looks, and sometimes when people say the way the film looks is the most important thing, means it's all surface and no substance. And I don't mean that at all. But what I mean is, if you are going to tell this story, it has to be told with a sense of awe. There have to be things in it that make you feel like you are going to strange new worlds, to seek out, strange bold new civilizations and boldly go. And it's not... We now live in a world in which it's quite easy to just kind of imagine that anything can be put on screen because, digital effects have become so astonishing. You just imagine, well, we can see anything. Everything has to be designed. Everything has to be created. Everything has to be photographed, whether it be virtually or really. So what you were talking about the locations, about the thing about actually being in these places, actually looking out at those things, and then combine that with, for example, the Sandworms, and the Sandworms who are created by, teams of designers. And we've all seen versions of Sandworms done, on screen before. I have to say, the first appearance of the Sandworm, I did go, wow.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Wow. That is really, I got a sense of scale. I remember talking before when we were reviewing Pacific Rim, and talking about one of the problems of 3D, is that it tends to miniaturize things. Well, there's none of that in Dune. I mean, that sense of scale is genuinely breathtaking. And I know that, therefore, one of
the word worm is slightly misleading, really.
Yeah, I know. Yes, exactly. But they are called sandworms, and they are huge creations. And in the past, when people have tried to sort of render that, I mean, the Lynch version has a very bold attempt using physical effects, but there are large sections of that just end up being silly. So I think the design is great. I think the design really works, and I think congratulations to everybody who worked on bringing that world to life, both physically and digitally, because I felt, whilst I was watching the film, I'm in these locations. I'm in this film. I'm going from this place to this place. So clear through line, genuine sense of location and place, and breathtaking sights, the kind of sights of which when Roy Batty says, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe, you kind of think he'd go, like this, there's a majesty to some of the spacecraft. There is that brilliant thing about, the dragonfly ships on the one hand, and then these vast arcs on the other hand. There was a moment in it that I got a sense. Do you remember seeing Close Encounters of the Third Kind for the first time? Mm-hmm. And when you first see the mothership, and pardon me, and you did go, wow. And then the mothership turns over. Remember that? The whole thing turns over. And we were all astonished by it. Well, because nowadays special effects have moved on, and it can be kind of harder to astonish people. But there were things in Dune that really made me feel astonished. In terms of the score, it's interesting that, you were talking about the sound design as you got onto the score. And again, it's one of those films in which the sound design and the score are very much of a piece. There is a central theme in Dune that, that you've got the sand and you've got the kind of the magical spice, the spice melange, which is kind of floating on the surface. And then there's this rumbling going on underneath. There's a whole thing about having to walk in a certain way so as not to create tremors that will attract the attention of the worms, which is very much like the kind of don't attract the shark in Jaws. But the film itself is built on a similar structure, that you have the Dune of the film, and then you have this magic dust, this spice melange of the film, which is the stuff above ground, which is glittery and kind of intoxicating, and you feel that, if you have too much of it, you'll start to become addicted to it, and it will turn your eyes blue. And then underneath, there's this stuff going on, which is like the kind of Tremors. I mean, both Tremors, the movie, and whilst we're on the subject of great big underground beasties that look like worms, the sound gives the film a base from which to build its world. And the score, which is full of portent. I mean, it's absolutely full of portent and full of, ceremony, and it also has these, these other things. The way in which he uses voices is very interesting. Lots of percussion, lots of kind of, setting the scene through the music. And I thought it was very interesting that what Denis Villeneuve said was, I didn't want to use a voiceover, so therefore I got Hans Zimmer to do the voiceover. That the music is telling you what's going on, inside the characters' heads. I also thought, with the Stellan Skarsgård character, there's a sort of seriousness there because the Baron, if he's close to anything, he's closer to Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now than he is in any other sort of, version of the Baron. And there is always the possibility with Dune that it's going to be boring. And I say that because with any mighty epic, there is the possibility that it's going to get bogged down. And I think I can pretty safely say that I never got bored watching Dune. It's, 2 hours, 35 minutes long? And those 2 hours and 35 minutes went for me. There weren't moments when I started getting restless, when I started thinking, this is overstaying its welcome, even though I knew that it was only part one. And I think it's really important to remember how much of an achievement that is. Because one of the things about the Lynch Dune is it's so full of madcap sites, of things in it that are just completely weird and Lynchy, that it's always got something to distract you. The thing with the Villeneuve version is it never felt like it was distracting you. What it felt like it was doing was that it was telling the story. And I never felt like, okay, this is a mess, but hey, there's Sting with wings. Or, hey, there's the Baron flying around in the air. Or, hey, there's a really absurd bit with the worm. It all felt of a piece. If I have any reservation at all, it is this. There are huge narrative hills ahead.
Well, you can't judge it on what it...
No. So I'm not... So what I'm saying is, okay, well done. We've got this far. Now, bring it home.
Yes. I'm sure he would love it. But he's in the Chris Nolan sort of category, isn't he? As someone who can deliver a very complex story and do it in such a spectacular way that everybody wants to go and see.
May I quote myself?
Well, you did last week, I think, so carry on.
Okay. When Inception came out, I said, look, what Inception proves is that blockbuster movies don't have to be stupid, that dumbing down doesn't make any difference. If a movie like Inception can become a huge hit, then why not aim high? Because the idea that you have to dumb down for the audience is patently not true. Well, Dune is in the same ballpark as that. The only thing I would say is it almost feels more organic than, Inception felt like a really complicated puzzle. And incidentally, I think the same is true of Tenet. But Inception felt like watching an incredibly complicated puzzle doing that. Dune didn't feel like that. Dune felt like this is a kind of complex story, but I'm taking a straight path through it, and I'm not in any way. I'm not being dazzled by the complexities of it, but I absolutely agree that it is like Christopher Nolan. That is a filmmaker who goes, okay, I'm working with a massive multi-million-dollar project. That doesn't mean I have to make it stupid so that it can be understood by the audience, because the audience are smarter than everyone's always thought.